Australia, we have kangaroos, great beaches, a lot of desert, and statistically, some of the largest housing on average in the world. In fact, between the 1980s and 2000s, the size of the average Australian household increased by 40%, which meant Australian housing was 10% bigger than even the USA equivalent. America has now taken back top spot. However, not all people are a fan of the McMansion. All over the world, people are choosing to downsize, minimalise, and begin enjoying the little things in life by choosing to live in a tiny house on wheels.
But living tiny is not always as easy as it looks on TV. In fact, getting legal planning or building approval is quite difficult because it's classified as a caravan despite being built exactly like a regular house, just on wheels. So I went to talk with tiny homeowners, builders and local governments to find out more about these unconventional homes.
Where better to start than the great US of A, land of the free and hotspot for tiny houses on wheels. Between 2010 and 2017, the median American house size increased by 257 square feet, while at the same time, the cost of a new home in America increased by 33%. But not everyone has the luxury of owning their own home. This is the everyday struggle of people working to keep a roof over their head. What you don't see on the statistics is an underground tiny house movement. So let's find out more about these curious dwellings and how this trend is taking the housing industry by storm. The first tiny house adventure began in Las Vegas, home of glitz, glamour, and great fortune. After checking out the architecture, meeting some of the locals, and immersing myself in the rich culture, I headed to downtown Fremont Street, off the main strip, where I found Airstream Village, Las Vegas. Because this village is privately owned, only visitors invited by residents are permitted inside. Luckily, it turns out they'll let any old riffraff in, and one of the residents was kind enough to give me a grand tour. This project converted an old motel and car park into a privately owned community for people living in Airstreams and tiny houses. The ground floor houses a communal indoor and outdoor kitchen, co-working spaces, communal laundry, pool, and an outdoor stage for live music on Friday and Saturday nights. And, bet you never would have guessed, a sloth called Winchester and 2 alpacas. Affectionately nicknamed Llama-lopolis, the village is founded on the principle that those who live or stay at the village are invited by residents and contribute to the village. For example, providing entertainment, food, or workshops. This sharing economy creates a warm and close-knit community. This village is well known because it's also the residence of multi-millionaire entrepreneur and venture capitalist Tony Hsieh, CEO of online clothing store Zappos. This is interesting because it shows the affordability of tiny homes can be secondary to the lifestyle that it offers. Next door to the village, works were underway to create Ferguson's Downtown, a small business hub to connect the community to a local farmers and craft market, restaurants, eateries, and more co-working spaces. This tiny house community seems like an incubator for creatives and artists who not only live in the area, but are moving out and re-inhabiting vacant properties to revitalise downtown Vegas. Personally, I can't wait to see what happens next in this active tiny house community. Next stop was the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, where I met with Byron Fears, founder of Simplicity Tiny House Company.
Hi there.
Back during our big recession that we just got out of a few years ago, the great American dream was to have a 3-bedroom house, 2-car garage, 2.35 children, and to have a mortgage that kept you an indentured servant for your whole life. Well, during the recession, it was proven that the great American dream was not sustainable. So we were building houses then and remodeling houses then, and we realized that we were not perpetuating a good plan for people. It was very susceptible to the downturns in the economy, and it was destroying the planet, being so wasteful. So we wanted to start doing something that would help people be more sustainable and start living a lifestyle that they could have time to look at their sweetheart. They could have time to do the things that they love to do. They could have time for themselves. They could live a more simple life, a life that didn't have as much impact on the planet. So we did a total paradigm shift in our business plan and started building tiny homes on wheels. It's been wonderful. I built our very first home, started in November 5 years ago, and that was the Aspen model. It proved to be very popular instantly. As soon as I built it, I got 3 orders. And for 5 years time period, we were building 3 to 5 tiny homes at a time for that entire time period. So it's been very rewarding. We're now building our 29th tiny home, and it's a 10 by 32. It's a not so tiny home. When I first started building tiny homes, I built a 24-footer. I got hate emails. I got hate messages on Facebook. People saying I was destroying the tiny house movement. Because 5 years ago, most people had 10, 12, 14 foot long tiny homes. So now, as our whole industry has evolved, people have learned that they actually would like to have more space. They aren't pulling it behind their car all the time, traveling around. They're planting it someplace and living in it. So now, about 65% of all tiny homes built in the United States are 24 foot and above. We're moving into larger homes now. I'm building a 10 by 32 at this moment. And that's more where our housing movement is going, I believe. Those that moved into those 10-foot tiny homes, 12-foot tiny homes, they were giving up everything. And then all of a sudden they found, my daily activity is I ride a bicycle, I climb mountains, I go backpacking, I go snowshoeing, I ski, I surf, I snowboard, I do this, I do that. Where am I going to keep those things? If you move into a home that's too small, without evaluating your lifestyle, all of a sudden you're giving up things, you're making compromises. Don't give up things, morph it into what's functional. You need things that nurture your soul and your daily activity. Most people take their tiny home, they park it somewhere and they live in it for quite a while. And so the need to have something small that's easy to tow is not of paramount importance any longer for most people. So many people go into tiny homes with their eyes wide closed, not wide open. They don't evaluate their lifestyle. They don't think about the things that make them happiest, the things that they need on a daily basis, and how to coexist with others in their home. And they just go, let's go small. They're going to be so cool. And so there's a high failure rate in that sense. They buy it and they go freaking crazy. It's like, I can't stand this. We build for romance and practicality and good usage of space. We are using metal roofs, which have long lifespan. It's well insulated. The low E windows, our appliances are all Energy Star rated. All of our lights are LED. And we try to use products that do not have bad chemicals for your body and health. The tiny house, people spend months or years designing it on paper in their head before they come to me. And then they spend days and days and hours and hours and hours talking to me and my wife about their design as to what will really work for them. They have a very personal investment in their tiny home. I've seen people gain a lot more liberation in their life. I've also seen people lose their dream because of legality of use. I've only had now, as of yesterday, 3 people that have had to move their homes. But one of them that devastated their life because they weren't able to flow easily. The other 2, they just moved on. You can live a big life in a tiny. You can live a bigger life in a tiny because you have more time for it.
Just right up the road from Simplicity in Lyons, I had the luck to stay at Wee Casa Tiny House Resort.
Welcome to sunny Colorado. Here I am in Lyons, which is about 2 hours north of Colorado Springs. And right behind me, you can see the tiny houses of Weekassar Tiny House Resort. You can rent one of these tiny houses for a night just to figure out whether you like living in a tiny house, or it's much like a chalet where you can bring your friends and family and go camping for the weekend. Each one of these tiny houses is privately owned and leased, so every year there could be a completely different one that you can try out. So let's go check it out. I hear they even have a hobbit house.
This tiny house resort hosts about 23 tiny homes of all different styles and designs. Much like a hotel room, you can rent one of these out for about $150 a night, with a daily cleaning service and on-site caretaker. This site also contains a function centre and a sheltered communal seating area. Due to the caravan restrictions in Colorado, the licenses for each tiny house are renewed annually, which means each year different tiny houses can be swapped out. Many of the tiny houses available are built by tiny house builders and rented out for tourism accommodation. This is a great option for tiny house enthusiasts who want to try out different designs and figure out if living tiny is really what they want. It's also a great unique travel experience and looks awesome on your social media feed. Next stop was Colorado Springs, where I caught up with Shauna Little from Tumbleweed Tiny Homes, one of the biggest and most well-known tiny house companies in America.
The kids are getting older. We want them to move out, but we don't want them to move them too far away. They're not quite ready for that yet. It offers a space for them that it's not in the mom and dad's house, it's outside the house, so they have their own space, but they're close enough. And vice versa, like the older folks. Baby boomers that have grandkids that are looking to downsize, they want to move their tiny house on the property of their kids so that they can be close, but they don't have to be in their space. I don't think there's one demographic in particular that it fits best for. I think it's every demographic. College graduates are looking, millennials, professional single women love tiny houses. And I think that was one of our main demographics, I'd say a couple years ago. Now, it's gone widespread, it's more people. But single female that are professionals, traveling teachers, traveling nurses, because of the mobility, and it provides the atmosphere of an actual traditional home. Elderly that they want to downsize, they don't want to have to keep up a lot of maintenance on things. It just fits for any kind of, if you need a solution, this tiny house fits. And so to be able to work here and see, not just the daily operations and the sales and stuff like that, but just for the movement perspective, just to see how an innovative product can change the landscape of like an entire country. I mean, that's what we're looking at. And they're just so cute too. Really, even if you don't want one, you don't want to live in one, everyone loves them. No one says, oh, I hate those tiny houses. No, everyone comes in, they're like just fascinated with them. So you'll get that grouchy neighbor that's like, what is this? And, regardless, I'm like, what is it? Why does it bother you so much? Like if it's a shack looking kind of a thing, I can understand that. Or if they aren't taking care of it, or if it's a fire hazard. But if it's a certified, RV, tiny house, you shouldn't have to worry because it's pleasing, you know, has curb appeal. So it's not an eyesore or anything like that. But then you're just going to get some grouchy people that are just going to push back against it because it's not something they would do. They don't think anyone else should do it. In those folks, you're just probably never going to change their mind. But you just hope you have neighbors, a majority of neighbors around you that aren't that way and are like, hey, yeah, bring your tiny house in. So our custom houses, that's when we were doing about 125 a year. It took a long time. So we standardized our floor plans. So we'll only have 8 floor plans to choose from. But then you get to choose your interior kind of overall look. You can choose what kind of appliances you have in there. You can choose, you know, your exterior color, whether you want a natural cedar or painted. So we do allow choices, but we don't break our floor plans. And in doing that, we also helped ourselves out because a customer would want, say they want their kitchen on this end, they want their bathroom on this end, they want the loft on this end. We were getting heavy on one end and not keeping that weight distributed properly. Now you can get your house in under 6 months as compared to a year and a half. Help yourself out by not putting all the weight on one end and then your truck gets lifted up or the weight's on the tongue and you know you're fishtailing all over. We hashed out all the engineering and decided we've been doing it long enough to know to do it the right way. Had a little bit of backlash about the custom because people have been watching us for so many years, and then when they're ready to get their tumbleweed, we've changed our ways. And they're like, they don't know what to do. You know, I've had this dream in my mind all these years and now you're telling me I can't get it. So there is a little bit of backlash. Right now in our slow season, we're averaging 8 per month. That's kind of what the demand is right now, which is unusual because last year, this same quarter, we weren't getting those numbers. So overall, the last couple of years, we've seen things just blow up. So a combination of things have, you know, helped us. The press, speeding up production, you know, limiting those floor plans, all work together to get it more streamlined. But I'm guessing we'll get to about 12 to 15 houses a month over the holidays. We have, I want to say, 15 folks in the office and the rest are in production. Last year, this time, we were building up to meet a big purchase order, so we had about 120 people here working. It was like you could walk out in the factory and it's just like ants, just building and building, and houses are moving, and it was so exciting. We've had a series of customers the last few months that they're, you know, down on their luck. They had an RV to live in. It's not the greatest, you know, but we did some promotions where they were trading in that old RV they were living in and exchanging it for a brand new tumbleweed to live in. And so it's really just upgraded their life. We put an egress window on each level of the house for just in case of emergency, a fire or something. We have a nice big window you can get out of. We put in fire extinguishers in every house, electrical and plumbing, you know, the kinds of outlets you put in, the trailer itself, and, you know, weight distribution. So our houses are inspected frequently. Like I think I see him, like the RVI inspectors here, like at least once a week. So they go and they inspect the house at certain stages of the build, and they, you know, give their little check of approval to make sure everything's good. And then at the end of the build, if it passes, you get a badge. And so your house has the actual badge on the outside on a plate that says you're RVI certified. And what that tells campground owners specifically is it's certified. You know, it's built right, it's safe. If you're parked next to it at the RV park, you don't have to worry about some weird fire starting because the electrical isn't done right. So it brings a lot of brings authority to our builds too, and it says, hey, we're a product that means business and we're safe. So El Paso County allowed 2 things. They allowed a tiny house to park in an RV resort for longer than the limited time. So it's a year that you can stay there. And after that year, you don't have to move. So you just like renew your lease. That makes it very convenient for folks that want to stay more permanently. In unincorporated El Paso County, you can live in it full-time now. So that's like your more rural areas of the county. We'd like to see citizens be able to go to the zoning office, even if they're not allowed to have it. We'd like to see them be able to negotiate with the local government and say, can we get a variance? Can we get an exception based on certain criteria? If we meet a certain standard of things, can you give us a little leeway on it? I think technically, if depending on where you're zoned here in El Paso County, you can use a tumbleweed as a guest house. Well, I think we've gotten away with a lot, and it's not a bad thing. So I'd our ultimate goal is just to see the whole country become tiny friendly, to see these go into neighborhoods or communities or RV parks, and it becomes more acceptable. It's not seen as like, oh, well, you don't have a big traditional house, so you're lesser than folks that are in traditional houses. We'd like to see it become more commonplace, more accepted, and if they're not paying, $1,200, $1,800, $2,500, whatever month for rent, and they're limiting their personal overhead, they'll be able to afford to do more things, get outside, travel more. That makes people happy. The big houses, not necessarily, because you have to pay for it. And in paying that much, you're not happy. So tiny houses, solve a lot of problems for people. You could probably even pass it down to the next generation. It just doesn't deteriorate like an RV or a mobile home because it's built like a house. It's insulated, it's stick built, it's got electrical, it's got plumbing. It's solid. We had the Ipu, which was the first tiny house put on wheels. It was I think it was 16 feet long, tiny. We had it here, actually. We resold it. It was the very first one, and then it came back to us, and we sold it to someone who bought it for the historical value. And it looks great. It's weathered, it looks like it's, the cedar on the outside is kind of aged and weathered. It looks like a little old cabin. So they should last as long as a traditional house. Provided you're not towing it weird or whatever. It should last, your lifetime. You may have to change the tires or do a little maintenance, just like a house, but it should last you forever. Every day there's another city that I read about in the news that's looking at them. Here in Colorado. And then, the rest of the country, like Fresno, I think, was looking, Reno, Nevada. Even we get calls from San Diego, like they're looking at LA, which is starting. So we're seeing more activity. We never really heard about communities in New York or Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Vermont. Those areas, there wasn't a lot of feedback, but we're hearing about them more in the South, especially North Carolina, South Carolina, around Asheville. There's a lot of tiny house communities popping up. It's hard to come up with a down payment. A traditional down payment is 20% of the loan. So that's still hard for people to come up with in one lump sum all at one time. We want to make the financing easier. We want to make it more attainable for folks that are struggling with the down payment. So we have down payment assistance programs, we have trade-in programs. We have probably more than a handful of lenders now that we've developed relationships with over the years. Tiny house lending is very new. It's not a market that's really been tested except for the last, maybe few years. So it's more of an experiment for the lenders. We started out with becoming RVI certified so we can offer lending. Then we had the RV loans, which are really, you have to have a lengthy credit history with real estate. So those loans weren't for everyone. They were luxury loans. And then we added loans that were more like mortgages, longer terms, 23 years versus 15 years on an RV loan. We've got to meet those people that don't have that down payment. So we have lenders that we can work with as little as 5% down. And then in-house, we offer a zero down So we actually help you with the down payment. Tumbleweed will take and help, will actually pay towards some of your down payment in a manner of speaking, just to get you in. Sometimes we can't do it, and it's a bummer, because those folks are probably the ones that need it the most. I'm not sure if we'll ever qualify for those government lending programs, but we can definitely go to, charitable organizations for grants for people, that kind of thing. We're open to that. We're opening to helping the struggle, get them out of whatever issue that they have. And then you own something at the end of it. You have that pride and ownership. So, and not only that, it doesn't depreciate at the same rate as a traditional RV. So if it's more affordable to pay for it, you can pay more on it, get it paid off faster, and you have more equity in it. And there's a secondary market. People will buy a used tumbleweed. We have people that call that can't quite afford a new one. They're like, well, what about a used one? We're going to see this secondary market really take off. Maybe not in the next couple of years, but definitely, probably at the end of the next 10 years, you'll probably be able to buy a used tiny house pretty easily compared to it is now. And then if you're buying a used certified house, that it's not a DIY that someone put together that they're reselling for super cheap, and then you're buying a problem as compared to a tumbleweed, which has, we have a manufacturer's warranty that's good for a year. We have extended warranties, which you can transfer to the next owner if you sell it. So there's peace of mind in that too. We'd kind of like to see that happen too, where people are also, hey, I have a new business that I can start up. I'm a tiny house repairman, tiny house handyman. That's good for everybody. It's good for that guy especially because now he has a new enterprise. So I think it'll go, there's a lot you can do, and there's going to be secondary markets, and it's just going to go from there. Like a lot of people can make money off a tiny house, not just the tiny house builder. If it's not, we have a lot of rundown mobile home parks that I think the tiny house movement can make an impact, get all the old junk out of there, scrape it all off. The infrastructure's there. And these you just roll in real easy and you hook them up. Next thing you know, this cruddy rundown mobile home park looks really nice. So you're bringing value to the area. It's harder to move that park model than it is a tiny house because you need a permit to tow it. When it's in transit, it has to have a wide load sign. You have to get a permit, which costs money. So if you wanted to move that, it's a little more difficult than a tiny house on wheels. A tiny house on wheels is like an RV. You just hook it up to the truck and away you go. You don't need an extra permit for it. Like the naysayers are like, oh, it's just a hipster mobile home park. So it looks better than what was there before. And hopefully in 2020 or maybe another 10 years, it'll be so normal that everyone will have one.
From the mountainous scenery of the Rockies, I flew to Texas, where I found myself in Spur, reportedly the first tiny house-friendly town in America.
Here I am in Spur, Texas, the first city in America to legalize tiny houses. There's a few interesting things about the tiny houses here, like they have to be on fixed foundations so they don't get blown away by a hurricane, and also that they have to be connected to sewer. I had a chat with some of the locals to find out more. First up, John Schmidt, the building compliance officer.
A builder named Randy Adams came down and pitched the idea to the city council of tiny homes. Said he had had some interest in it, and he had a woman that had bought some land and wanted him to build one. And so we all got together and we discussed what the requirements would be. We took the building code of 2005, just like we would for if you were building a normal sized dwelling. If you come in with it on wheels, first we ask for the specifications. We read the specifications and see how it's built, how it's wired, how it's plumbed. If it meets the building code of 2005, then we approve it. And once they buy the land and set it up on the lot, they have to remove the wheels and the axles. They have to put it on either a slab foundation or a pier and beam foundation. It has to be plumbed to the city sewer and plumbed to the city water. And they have to have an opening in the curb where that they can get their vehicle off the street. No, the parking is not allowed on the street. And that's the main requirements. We started getting people calls from all over the country. So we put the ordinance online where anybody could access it through the website. And we started getting calls. People would call and say, is this legal? Is this legal? In the meantime, we had 3 companies that came down, Superior, Leland, and Tomahawk, and gave us all of their dossier on their specifications. We okayed them to where that if they built one off-site, then they could just move it in and set it up either on slab, pier and beam, tie into city water and sewer, and build a driveway, and it would meet all the city regulations and the ordinance. It's something we've hoped for, and people ask me over the years, the last 2 or 3 years, what I see, and I actually see probably 500 to 600 over the next 10 to 20 years, tiny houses, because people are downsizing. They're getting rid of a lot of their old stuff, and they seem to like the simplicity of living in a small town where the taxes are lower. Diversified people, I mean, you just have all walks of life. Like Kay Martis was a banker. Carol is still a professor, teaches online. Reba was a professor, she taught online. Connor does computer work. Stephen Kemple out there is a retired naval officer that also, once he retired from the Navy, he was a professor at a university where he taught. It's really hasn't changed that much as far as people were skeptical to start with. They didn't know what kind of people you were going to get. People that were wanting to live cheap or might have cheap housing and they wouldn't go all out, but they've been really surprised at the quality of people that have come in and the quality of the homes they've brought or built when they, like Jim Worsham, retired fire marshal, I forgot about him, built one of the nicest ones. I mean, it's super the way he's built it and all. So, like I say, people from all walks of life. It's the only town in the world that has actually accepted tiny houses. So for a little town like Spur, 900 people, that's a feather in our cap, I would say. And the people, coming in, they go to the churches, they buy groceries, they pay taxes. It's all helps the town and the county. So to me, it's a good thing.
After establishing what the local government requirements were for a tiny house in Spur, we managed to track down a local by the name of Carol Hefner, who provided personal insight into how she built her tiny and what it's like living in Spur.
Hello, I love my tiny house. It's the best tiny house in Spur. A friend of mine came over and she said, have you heard about these tiny houses? And I said, no, what's a tiny house? And she said, well, it's all over the internet right now. And this was probably, I moved here in 15. This was probably in 2014 or so. So my first plan was to find a way to build one in California. But, I was renting. I had no place to build. I knew I could do it. I knew I had the skills to do it, but I didn't have any place to do it. And then I couldn't afford land. I couldn't afford my toe print in California, so that wasn't going to work. So I just kind of shelved the idea for a while, and then something bad turned into something good. I had a car accident. I got an insurance settlement. But I had still kind of kept up with what was going on in the tiny house world. All of a sudden, as soon as I knew I was getting the settlement, I found Spur online. And it's like, Spur, what's Spur? So, I just started doing research. I looked at Google Earth. I talked to the VP of Academic Affairs and the president of the university. I said, I've got this opportunity and I really can't afford to live here in California. They didn't offer me any more money, so I left. So, I still teach there, but they moved all my classes to online. And I came here and then had this dream, and now I'm living in it. So it's really amazing. So it's been an amazing and sometimes difficult journey. I started out at about 400 square feet. And as I thought about it, I'm really good at proprioception, you know, myself in space, and so I'd practice living in every design I made. You know, I would just close my eyes and I'd practice being in it, you know, practice working in the kitchen, and then I would find space in that was basically either not usable or not used. And so I just kind of kept whittling it down, whittling the design down to get it to the essence. You know, just the essence of what you need to live in. This is 216 square feet. To me, it lives way bigger than that, but it's designed to be lived in. It's designed for my lifestyle, the way I want to live. So that the money I came to Spur with was the money that was supposed to be able to build my house when I came here. That two builders gave me an estimate and said that would be it. But it wasn't. So yeah, I did it all cash though. I have no rent, no mortgage, no debt, except for my student loans. No debt, no payments, nothing. I did it all cash. And that feels good, really good. When we finally got to where I could be in here, really bringing my vision to life, it was nothing but pure joy. Because I was seeing what I had in my head for all this time come into even though it was already 3D in my head, it was like I could touch it, I could feel it. And when it manifested even better than what I had in my head, it was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I built and designed all this stuff in it myself, this thing, the cabinet, all the boxes. I was the third person here. Connor was first, the 84 square foot house. Denise was second, and I was third. Really what they did is they changed the wording of the zoning so that there's no minimum square foot to build a house in Spur. You know, I was reading some ordinances for someplace in North or South Carolina a couple years ago, and they were going to let everybody build tiny houses. But it was a minimum 900 square feet. The living room was a minimum 10 by 10. So they had all these minimums in it. It's like, well, that's not a tiny house. That's just it's smaller than the McMansions that people are building, but it's not what most people think of when they think of tiny. I think what the city expected was more younger people and probably more houses on wheels. What they've gotten is more, older people, you know, who've had a career or are retired or close to retirement, professionals, you know, the ones of us who are here and working here. We work online. We have better internet. I lived in Silicon Valley. I have better internet here than I did there. I mean, way better. I mean, I can join a meeting at school from Spur easier than I could 10 miles down the road in California. That's the truth. So that's one thing they did that was brilliant. And it's interesting, we have had people come here that look at the town, not the houses, but the town, and say, oh, I would never live here. And then we've had people come in here and say they need a 600 square foot tiny house. And then they come in mine and they see, well, there's space for everything. And it's like, wow, I could live smaller than I thought. You know, so there's something about being inside of one and touching and feeling it. You know, I've always said too that tiny house living isn't as much about what you have or don't have, or even the physical space you live in. It's more of a mindset. It's more of a, you know, what do I really need in life and what really makes me happy? And though I traveled all over the country with a lot of stuff, it wasn't what was making me happy, you know. Designing and building and riding my bike and walking with Edward or previous dogs, you know, having somebody over for a grill out, you know, those kinds of things are what make me happy. And that's also the mindset that becomes the block for a lot of people, because cities as well as individuals think, well, we need this stuff. You need big, we need all this stuff we've got. I think cities fall into, well, we need the taxes. You know, what's a tax on a tiny house? Well, it's not as much as on a 4,000 square foot house. I think that lenders and insurance companies and banks and cities think that this is a passing whim, and that either people are going to default on their loans because they're going to realize, oh my God, I don't want to live in a tiny house, or the cities are going to end up with a bunch of abandoned tiny houses, or they're not going to, they don't get enough return from the tiny house. Like a bank, if you need to borrow $50,000 to build a tiny house, that's a lot less income for the bank than if you have to borrow $150,000. And yet that is the same thinking that got us into 2008, got the United States into 2008, that caused a huge crash because of what's happened and because of that bubble that was created with people buying houses and banks allowing people to buy houses they really couldn't afford. We are where we are today in our economy, and it affects it's global. It's a global thing. So it's interesting that we've learned nothing from that. That's what the fact that people can't get loans tells me. We've actually learned nothing. People now want to live in homes that they can afford, but they can't borrow money to do that either. So does that make any sense? It makes no sense to me. On this moment, I can't imagine living anywhere else. I have evenings where I sit here and I feel more peaceful and more content than I felt probably all my life. I don't ever remember that kind of consistent feeling. I don't even know, I don't watch TV anymore or anything, so I don't even know if any of the tiny house shows are still on TV. I think that was fueling a lot of certainly my friend in California would have known about it if it hadn't been for, one of the shows, I forget which one she was watching. But the thing that, as I got into this, the thing that I discovered about those shows is they were actually doing the movement a disservice. They were doing the movement a service in that they were getting people aware, but I think they were giving them unrealistic expectations about what could be done for a certain amount of money, because we still got people coming here wanting a tiny house for $20,000. That's not going to happen on wheels. That's not going to happen on foundation. It's just not. So there's some unrealistic expectations. Now, the city one time had an event where it was a Saturday. They contacted all the tiny house people and said, would you like? If you said yes, you were on the tour. If you said no, no pressure. You were on the map, and it was okay if people drove by, but they didn't come in. I had 64 people here from, I think, 10 to 1 on a Saturday afternoon. The town made bunch of money, because they charge for tickets. That kind of thing I love. And I actually love answering people's questions. What I don't appreciate is a sense of entitlement when they show up at my door. So yeah, I think the tiny tourism would be a cool thing. What I've thought about doing, and what I've said to the two people here that want to do tours in town, I said, I don't mind people coming by. I don't want people just stopping by at any time of the day or night expecting a tour. What I would love for the town to do is set up one Saturday a month, a couple hours on that Saturday, and actually do a tour, do something like the city did. From 10 to 12, tiny houses will be open. They do accept donations or something like that. There's nothing I don't like about living in this house and living tiny. I think, and there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, I designed it very consciously with the way I live, and I'm old enough and I pay attention enough to the way I use space to know how I live and know what would suit me. The one thing I am very grateful for, since I do still work, is being able to have my office in another building. I have to get up and go to my office. So I think that's really a positive for anyone thinking about this. Think about how are you going to design your workspace that it doesn't completely mesh with your living, because there has to be a separation. I mean, at least for me. I don't have to cram my house full of storage because I have the shop. So and since Lubbock is so far away, it's 85 miles away, and I don't have a car. That means when I go to Costco, I can buy the big things of toilet paper and the big things of toilet or paper towels, and the big things, and I only have to have one or two in the house, and I can store the rest. So I'm also very cognizant of the fact that I can live in a 216 because I don't have to worry about storage. I don't have to worry about having my office. Well, I would say listen to the people, because there are a lot of people in a lot of cities who want to do this, and there are a lot of people who are working to get this done, but it's the cities that balk at it. So I think education is important. That's why I've said to builders that come here, when they want to do something new or whatever, and the city says, I said, it's first about education. You can't ram something down somebody's throat. It's first education. So cities need to become educated. They also need to remember the past, like we just mentioned, 2008, when people, and so many people are still underwater with their houses. I mean, I was reading an article that a lot of people's homes who managed to stay in them, they're still worth 40% less than they were in 2017. I can only speak for myself, and what it's done for me is I feel like a lot lighter. I mean, in every way I can think of. And some of that is, it's just, there's no financial burden. I don't have to worry about somebody raising my rent. I don't have to worry about making a mortgage payment. So there's like no financial worry like that. Some of it is knowing I'm in the right place at the right time. Knowing that I have absolutely everything I could ever want or need. I have some really good friends in town. So it's just, this is all a perfect storm for me of peace and contentment. So I know that's how it's changed me. I'm not looking for anything. I'm still active and still engaged and still curious about everything and still loving design and still loving to build, but I'm not looking for anything. Does that make sense? I think cities become afraid of the kinds of people who live in a tiny house. Oh my gosh, we can't have those people here, But those people are the people that know what they can afford, will afford it, and live well, and contribute to your city. I don't believe that this is a movement that 90%, 80%, even 70% of the people are going to ever latch on to. But even if it's only 5 or 10% that are suddenly living within their means and living the way they want to live and not worrying all the time. I thank Spur every day for it because they listened. Well, actually for them, I think it was some desperation too. I mean, I bought 2 lots that they had been taken care of for years. They weren't getting any taxes on them. And now I'm paying property tax. So everybody's happy. I learned again, and I think for the first time and again, that it's okay to not do what people tell you have to do.
It seems this quiet country town of Spur, Texas, is slowly being rejuvenated by embracing tiny houses. Not just for the residents who choose to move here, but also from the tiny tourism that it generates. From Texas, I then flew to Fresno, California, which is reportedly the first city in America to legalize tiny houses on wheels through the introduction of a local planning policy. To find out more, I spoke to Nick Mosley, owner of California Tiny Homes, who was there at the launch of the policy.
Fresno not only laid the groundwork, the foundation for the whole statewide movement, but they created almost a definition for what tiny houses can be, utilized for in permanent dwelling aspects, which is basically a tiny house on wheels can be placed in your backyard. In Fresno, it has to sit on a concrete pad. Not everywhere it does now, but they require a concrete pad. Plumbing, you can park your house on it, and you can live in it full time. You never have to leave. Your neighbors can't complain. The city can't complain. It's totally legal. It's legal for every single person that has a lot that's sized right. And that is on wheels. So it remains on the wheels forever. You don't have to take it off. You don't have to anchor bolt it down. You don't have to do anything special. You can just pull a house in and you can live in it. And I think we were the first people in the entire United States to actually have a bill that allows somebody to do that. Is now we've got 10 to 12 other cities and counties that took what we did here in Fresno and we've kind of tweaked it to make it work better for them. So like LA allows you to rent both. They know more people own rentals in LA than anything, so they're going to be letting people rent the main house and the tiny house, separately. Well, the biggest challenges when I started building tiny houses is I had literally no idea what I was doing. There wasn't a lot of information to reference like there is now. There was no reference point. All I could do was look at the only other company that was in business that I could find at the time, and I didn't want to copy them because I didn't like their designs. One of the biggest problems is doing everything correctly and making sure that one, the house is safe, it's designed well, it's balanced. That's one thing that I don't hear a lot about in the tiny house world is your house, does it have good weight distribution, It's stuff like that most people, especially people that build their own, don't necessarily think of. I've been working on this for 2 years is what I always hear, 5 years. And it's perfect, it's everything I want. And the second I see it, I just go, oh, that'll never work. I didn't know about, how these things are constructed, or that I had to have a window that was big enough to have a firefighter pull me out if my house is burning down or jump out of, I just didn't know about a lot of these things prior to this. And most people drawing their own sets of plans don't either. That's anytime you see a thing like this start up, everyone wants to jump on board. Everyone thinks, oh, I'm a tiny house, builder. I built, a chicken coop or something. And then you start seeing them go into lawsuits and their houses are falling apart and upset people. And so then they give tiny houses a bad name because now you see on the news that this tiny house, burned down. The state of California made it illegal to build and sell an uncertified tiny house. Do they still do it? Yes. Once it starts getting regulated, once it starts getting more and more popular, a more viable solution, once you see the whole state of California get on board and make tiny house living legal, you're going to see a big difference in who's around and who isn't. And you're always going to get a big boom of people that say, oh yeah, I can build a tiny house, or I can start a tiny house business, but don't realize all that goes into it. And those people are usually going to fade away, and then there's going to be a few of us that remain. We were licensed contractors prior to this. We dealt with California Building Code, which is one of the strictest building codes in the entire world. I mean, it's crazy. So we're used to regulations. We're used to all of that kind of stuff. So Appendix Q is going to be awesome in the future. And this is just my personal opinion. What it does for the tiny house movement is great. It defines what like a loft bedroom is, what a staircase could be in a tiny house. And most of the time I'm going to say tiny house, I'm going to be talking about tiny house on wheels. The rest are just small, like a cottage. So Appendix Q defines everything from the wheels up. So no tiny house on wheels currently can ever comply with IRC code Appendix Q because they have wheels. If they weren't on wheels, then they absolutely can. That's the issue. So they're going to revisit the wheels thing in 2020, but it's one of those things where it's great that it's passed, but it doesn't really help. So from the foundation up, IRC Appendix Q, we're already comply with that. But once you slap a set of axles and wheels under it, now Appendix Q is no longer a thing. Now it's ANSI or NFPA. You've got two governing bodies that govern tiny house on wheels. You've got RVIA and you've got Pacific West Associates. They're federally accredited, meaning the federal government actually recognizes them as a third-party inspection agency. Well, then you've got two other companies that are very similar in what they do, except they're not federally accredited, which means that currently what they offer doesn't actually have any government backing. Unlike California building code, where you're building a house, as you get to the foundation, somebody comes out and inspects the foundation. You build the walls, you frame them, somebody comes out and inspects the framing. It doesn't work like that with tiny houses because they're treated more like an RV. It's like a cross between an RV and a factory built house. So yes, we have inspections. They come out once every 3 months. They inspect all the units that we have on site, and then they backlog. So we have photo documentation, we have video documentation, we have pass-fail notes. We have all of that information for every house since their last visit. And we get a lot of people that come in and say, I want mine built to California building code, or I want mine built to IRC code because it's safer. It's really not. When you build an RV that looks and feels and is built with the same materials as a house, it is way more stringent than a normal building code. We pretty much only build custom. I've never been big on models just because I think when you're living in a small space, it really has to work for you. You buy an RV because you're living in it part-time. Does it really matter if it works for you, if you're staying in it for 2 weeks? No, not really. I know every customer's name, all 50 plus of them, including the 17 that we've got. I know every build, I know every design. I always go through and call every client, make sure, see what works, what doesn't. I mean, we found like a fridge that people didn't like for whatever reason, and it made sense. So I just stopped even showing it to people at all. And if they ask, then I give them my honest opinion about it. Same thing with toilets. There's so many different types of toilets, and now I've found basically 4 that I will use and nothing else I really want to mess with. People just have stuff. We all have stuff. We all have routines. We all have certain things that we like, certain things that we don't like. And if you build a house around all those things, you're ultimately going to have a much happier client in the long run. They're going to wake up that first morning in their tiny house and they're going to feel like they're home. More often than not, probably 75% are people who live in it full time. That's what most of our clients are. However, we do have a big push right now for people that want to use them as an investment, so they're buying them, they're renting them out, they're Airbnb-ing them out. Groups are buying them together to place them on a property, and then those two families can use it whenever they want, and they're renting it in the meantime. But they're all really happy. I mean, we've got millennial couples from, in their late 20s to retirees in their late 60s. The retiree just didn't want to clean a big house anymore. All her kids are gone, wanted something that was simple, that was easy to heat and cool. She's parking right next to her daughter's house and gets to see her grandkids all the time. So it's a great experience. She feels like she's more part of the family than ever before, but she doesn't have to live in that house. She's got her own space. And it's the same thing completely reversed for the younger couples. They bought their first house. It's a great transition house because they can pay it off quickly. I mean, I think in under 5 years they pay it off. And then they can sell it. They can use it as a vacation home. They can save up to buy their own house. More often than not, from all our clients, is that it's improving their lifestyle. So a lot of them were working, 2 and 3 jobs down in San Jose to afford rent, which is like $3,000 a month. And, now since getting their tiny house, their payments are $500 a month. And that's savings is so massive that they can afford to do either all the stuff they want to do, or they can afford to quit 2 of their jobs and only work 1. Now they're spending more time with their family or friends. They're getting to actually have a social life. It's not about downsizing your lifestyle. It's about increasing, what your capabilities are and what you want to do. We had a client bought a house 2 years ago. All he wanted to do was travel. And he says, I've been stuck in the same job, same apartment for years. bought a tiny house, and he's been traveling like ever since and just renting it out. And so that alone pays for his travels. It's pretty cool. You know, it makes people's dreams come true versus them working and slaving every single day and having nothing to show for it after 50 years. We've had media and national television, and we've worked on our own television shows. We've got, you know, just so much stuff has happened. My dad and I just started a nonprofit that works with high schools throughout the state of California. And basically we have 26 schools right now that build tiny houses as curriculum. So we're writing textbooks, we've got curriculum for them, we've got, and then outlets for them to basically sell their house at material value. We have a lot of devastation in this world, you know, from wildfires to floods to hurricanes. And if we always have a pool of houses that are available for emergencies, that basically the government's paying an outside source now to build these houses, and the people hate them because they're pieces of junk. But if the government's putting money into the CTE program, students and teachers are learning, which is only helping them for the future. They're also producing the same, if not more, houses, and those houses are much nicer quality and are going to families. Even if you don't want to live in a tiny house, and there's a lot of people that just don't. The people who want nothing to do with it still like them. You know, it's hard to hate a tiny house. They're adorable, they're fun to build, they're fun to look at. The designs are like nothing that's ever been done before, you know, because they have to be innovative. You know, there's so much more that you have to think about to have a house travel down a highway and still stand. You know, with an RV, it's different. They're super lightweight, they're aerodynamic, they're built with, you know, plastic and more plastic and more plastic. They're built for the purpose of traveling down a highway. A standard home, you know, is not built or designed that way. Even though they're on wheels, most of what we do anyways are not travel trailers. Most of these people are pulling them somewhere, they're parking them, they're staying for a few years, and then they're moving, and then they're staying there for a few years. And that's really what the purpose of them. It's so that you're not tied down. But if you want to travel, buy a travel trailer or a motorhome. You can't beat the way those are designed for that specific reason. But for the most part, tiny house people are really cool. You know, we all kind of stick together. We all have similar visions. You know, are they exactly the same path? No, you know, there's some people going this way, but we all kind of meet up in the middle every single time. We all have a common goal. We want to, you know, provide affordable and attainable housing. We want to build houses that are fun, you know, that aren't your typical cookie cutter, you know, subdivision that just seems like it's taken over the country. And any of the professional companies out in the United States right now, we're all building quality homes that are going to last for a very long time. I mean, they're going to last as long as a standard home built on a foundation. There's literally no difference. Now, yeah, you'll have to replace your tires 10 times over the lifespan, I'm sure. But aside from that, everything else is just a regular home.
And who better to tell us about the policy than the man who had a part in writing it? I had the luck of meeting up with Dan Fitzgerald, previously county manager of Fresno and now president of the American Tiny House Association, who shared his involvement in the tiny house movement.
I'm Dan Fitzpatrick, and I'm the Director of Government Affairs and Advocacy for the American Tiny House Association. And so my job and responsibilities is to try to work with local governments and state governments throughout the United States to change laws and zoning codes and planning codes and building codes to make the world more amenable to tiny house living. And to me, tiny houses is just one element of a larger piece of providing affordable housing. I got involved in tiny houses because friends of mine started building them, and I came down and said, hey, what can I do to help? And their biggest problem was, okay, we can build them and they look like houses and they work real nice, people want them, and there's a lot of national TV shows, supporting tiny house, living. But the biggest problem we're having is local governments still don't accept them as tiny houses. They still see them as conventional recreational vehicles versus real, tiny houses. They just happen to be built on a chassis with wheels. My job has been to go out and work with local governments to try to change their laws to make tiny houses legal. And the first place we did that is here in the city of Fresno, California, which is a city of about 500,000. Fresno was one of the first, or was the first in the nation to do that. And whether it's on a foundation or not, building tiny in accordance with current building codes is very difficult, because you'd have your whole house being used for the proper stairway, widths, and sleeping lofts wouldn't be allowed because the headroom wouldn't be 7 feet. But it's also a matter of making zoning changes. Many times there's requirements in the zoning code that a single family dwelling unit has to be more than 500 square feet. Well, that's no longer tiny. That's a small house, not a tiny house. So how do you break down some of those issues and barriers that keep people from, downsizing? The definition of a household has changed so dramatically. When I was a kid, a typical household was mom and dad and 3 or 4 kids. A household today might be a single mom or a single dad, or a dad and a dad, or a mom and a mom. It could be any number of combinations of households, to the extent that as the size of housing went up, the number of people living in the house has gone down. Too much of our zoning codes and building codes are geared towards what I'll call the average house, which is now in the United States over 2,000 square feet. And there's only one country in the world that has more square feet per house than the United States. And do you know what country that is? It is Australia. So Australia, Canada, and the United States are big house lovers. Most countries in the world are 1,000 square feet or less. Too much of our building and zoning codes are encouraging all of this size. One person can live in a tiny house of 200 square feet, and they have proper plumbing and proper sanitation, and a place where they can get fresh water and cook, and a place to sleep, and it's safe and secure. Why shouldn't they be allowed to live in it? Why should I be telling them, no, you got to live in this bigger size house because I want you to? That makes no sense. Tiny houses are a element that goes into the housing mix. You need everything from homeless shelters to big mansions, and in between a lot of different types of houses. Well, some citizens will show up, we don't want RVs in backyards and people living in them. And the biggest thing is that you've got to educate folks is that no, we're still prohibiting conventional recreational vehicles. They're still prohibited. The big X, no, right? Unless they look like and are built like any other house, their foundation just happens to be a chassis with wheels on it. But if it's built like and looks like a conventional house, that can be permitted as long as it meets basic, codes. So no city likes to be the first in anything, right? Now, as soon as I get Fresno and LA and a few other cities, all with a code that is permitting them, you watch, it'll be like a bunch of dominoes of other cities willing to do it. They just don't want to be the first. They're putting their neck out on the line. I have a ready to go in a can, a model code that I can send out to all of the cities across the United States saying, here's a model code you can put together for your city with examples of how each of these following cities dealt with these issues. And there are differences. You can imagine the snow load issues on a tiny house in the Rocky Mountains, here in the United States versus a surfer bungalow in the coast in California, which is also controlled by the what they call the Coastal Commission, which has many rules and regulations. So how one writes them has to be oriented towards where a particular entity is located. The city of Fresno has in there that they want a concrete pad to put it on. But they are open, I've talked to them, they are open to maybe having a compacted gravel surface or a paved surface. The way we wrote it for like the city of LA, that same section of the code, we wrote it that it can be a concrete pad, paved, or gravel, that which the building department determines is sufficient, keyword, sufficient to handle the weight of the unit and the jacks, which makes sense. They don't want something that they've permitted in a backyard to go tumbling over because it was built on mud. Most people don't realize that movable tiny houses won't move often. It's like 0.005% are moving on any kind of regular basis because they're only moving once. They're moving from the shop to the site. Now they may move 10 years from now. The issue of now connecting to water, sewer, and electricity, that has to happen no matter what. Right? I mean, you just can't put something in a backyard and have a garden hose, to it. And you got to, handle the sewer system. And what Fresno and most other cities are doing is just saying, you just come in and show us the trenching plan of how you're going to connect the water and sewer into the main house's plumbing. That's all. It's no big deal. When you go to a campground, what do you hook up to? There's a water and sewer and electric. Those are costs that are going to be there one way or the other. The building code is passed on a national level. Then each of our 50 states have to approve it. And then each of the cities and towns have to approve in whole or part. So it varies state to state. But again, local governments here control pretty much 90% of the rules and regulations regarding tiny houses or buildings in general. There's always a lag time. There's always like 3 to 4 years lag time from the time one starts making the changes until the time it's actually able to be implemented at the government level. There has been the past couple years is a lot of the hobbyists being very upset with us mainstreamers going, no, I want to go do my own thing. I want to go get my old boat trailer and go tear a barn down and build this thing, and you shouldn't tell me how to live in it. And I'm saying, I'm not telling you how to live in it, but if you're going to live in my city, right, and you want a permit to live in my city or my county, to do that, it's got to meet certain basic, codes. But if you come in and you set the whole neighborhood on fire because of a faulty built, right, it's not you who will get sued. It'll be the government that gets sued. So slowly but surely we're educating the do-it-yourselfers, the hobbyists, that it's important to build to basic code standards. The momentum is growing. It started out as a small, but it's not a fad. It's no longer a fad. It is a real live movement and is being slowly but surely incorporated into the fabric of our local government society. It was just so rewarding to see people recognizing that this is a legitimate and wholesome way of living for certain segments of our society, and see the look on the face of the mayor and council that they were doing their little part to make it, to make that a reality. And that was something that still brings a smile to my face. What's interesting is the people that I've talked to that have downsized and are living in tiny houses, they just love it. I mean, they made a conscious decision. That's their lifestyle. Now that, their lifestyle may change when they decide that they were going to have, children, or maybe they have just young children now, and all of a sudden they become teenagers. A tiny house may not, be big enough, but it certainly meets particular needs of populations at different times of their lives. It's not for everybody, but there are niches of folks that they're just starting out their career, or a lot of professions in today's world are different than they were when I was growing up. It's a very mobile society. We have traveling nurses. We have traveling professors. Like a turtle, take your house with you. 2 years from now, we'll be almost laughing at this. Like, what, we did that? I mean, everybody's doing it now. I said it's all ages, all races, all ideologies coming together. And it's become sort of a business in and of itself to have these tiny fests, especially in Washington, Oregon, California, Texas, Colorado, and New England. Those are the main areas. There's 2 or 3 or 4 a year in each of those states. What I find fascinating about tiny houses, you could be going down the roadway pulling a tiny house, and people come by, they're taking pictures. If you pull off on a rest area, etc., half the freeway gets off behind you to take pictures of the tiny house. They're like magnets. I don't know what it is. It's something, a magnet. You can set up one in like downtown Fresno or downtown LA, and I'd have people lined up around the block to take a tour of it instantly. It's just amazing. It just brings a smile to their face.
The next stop was Portland, Oregon, who were also working to legalize tiny houses on wheels through the planning and building system. To find out more, I sat down with Terry Whitehill, the city's building official.
Historically, they come in, and when they're on wheels, we tell them we don't do it. If they are ones that want to do like these, the hotels, which are basically tiny houses, but we've done them as a campground. So when the first ones came in, and I'm a creative person, so I found a route for them to go, and we got it to work, and I think it's been pretty successful. We didn't actually look at the houses themselves, but we looked at the site where they were going to be. There's some requirements for separation. We said that if each one has its own bathroom, we wouldn't require a common bathroom facility. So each of the units at the caravan has its own bathroom. They have a like an RV connection to a dump station right there. So they're all basically plumbed and wired. They have a plug-in connection so you can unplug it. They have a hose connection for the water like a caravan that you can undo. And then they have a flexible connection to the dump station for each unit there. We have had people building them in Portland for actually a substantial period of time. I think we were one of the early spots where these things originated from. So we have code in Portland that says you really can't use them, but we haven't really enforced it. We are complaint driven. If nobody complains, we don't go out and visit anybody. And they've been pretty successful, those spots where they've put them. I think they've been good neighbors, and so nobody complains. I don't think it's a huge number as a percentage of things, but I know that they're out there. I kind of look the other way, and you see there's articles in the paper about them, so I know that there's several different ones, and I know that there's some community type ones. There's no mass producers of them right now, although I do know a few of the RV production people that would like to do some of this. And so they're hoping for a code that they can use. Codes develop because of problems, We have, like you can see across the street, the food carts that we have, and they're really not regulated because they're on wheels, but we've had fires in a couple of them. So at some point we'll probably start regulating them to a certain extent, because you want some standards when you have electrical connections and wiring that's going on. You want some standards on your plumbing and sanitation to make sure that those things are done right and go to a proper place. So right now they would have to have 2x6 walls instead of 2x4. And when you're small to begin with and you're losing inches to insulation, especially on something that hardly takes anything to heat to begin with, that might be something that needs a little tweaking. The ones on wheels, we're not going to be looking at the chassis or the frame at all. All we'll look at is a structure built on top of it. They're going to have some height to them. They'll be susceptible to wind to blow over and stuff, but they're small, so hopefully you don't kill somebody when that happens. But in a big windstorm, they probably wouldn't do very well. From what I've heard, I'm not sure that DMV will license them. So they will get a trip permit if they're moving them, like you're moving a manufactured home down the road. But I don't think DMV, from what I heard, will put a license on them, because part of our issue was how do we, even if we permit them and give them some paperwork, how do we show that paperwork goes with that thing if it doesn't have some kind of a license or some kind of a tag on it that we can then look at and say, yeah, the paperwork matches the vehicle. So that's one of the issues that we still have to work out a little bit. So the state has an RV code, and it's ran by the Building Codes Division, but they made the decision that if they were built these tiny houses that are wood framed and stuff, that those fall under their RV code, and that you can't use the RV code. So historically, more than a couple of years ago, you could have actually got it permitted through that process, but you can't anymore. And so they become this kind of gray area limbo thing. I think it's given people that want to live that kind of a lifestyle a way to get there and to do that. If you put a tiny house on a foundation, it would basically be an ADU here. Because their ADUs can be up to 800 square feet. So if you're using the tiny house rules, what that gives you is a way to get to a loft with a ladder, which we can't do through the building code. A lot of ADUs that are built with them, and they tell us it's a storage area, and it's, of course, their bedroom it ends up, which we couldn't permit historically. But this gives us a path to get there, to now allow that to be a sleeping area up in the loft. We had hoped that the state would just do them through their RV program and continue to do it, but they chose not to do that and are sending it through as more of a regular house, which will be more stringent safety requirements. So we have a planning code that is local, which, like I say, says what you can and can't do on a piece of property and maybe a little bit what it needs to look like. But that is totally a local code. And then the building code side of it, how it is built, that is the state code. Well, you see the dedication of these people that are doing it, and a lot of them want to get a permit and to do it right. We just haven't had a path for them. And so just seeing that, when you see people that are willing to work really hard to try and get a path and to do something right, I always really appreciate that and take that into consideration with people, because when you don't really have a model for them and they're trying to do something and not break rules, it takes a lot of work on their part. And so I've just seeing the people, their passion for what they've done, and finding a way to get there. Yeah, I mean, it has been something. Like I say, I'm not opposed to creative and innovative things, so I usually try to find ways to help them. I'm also involved at the national level writing codes, because even though we have an Oregon code, it's based on the national code. So I'm involved there, and it's been a topic there too. Then at the state level, and then even within the city of Portland. So it's kind of moving through all over the place. I don't think we'll see a reduction. I don't think it's just a fad. Even though it's been underground for a while, it's finally coming out, and if there's a path to get there, that's a good thing.
Curious to find out more about the process to get approval for a tiny house hotel, I sat down with Deb Delman, co-owner of Caravan the Tiny House Hotel.
I remember seeing the book, the Tiny Book, and by Jay Schaefer, and that was kind of my first exposure to these small spaces being on wheels, which was pretty exciting. There was this empty lot on Alberta Street that it wasn't empty, but it had been used for some businesses that just didn't really take off. And I owned the house next door to Caravan, and so I had watched this lot for years, kind of not quite do what I knew it could do. And my husband and I had gotten really involved in the small housing movement because I had lived in small houses for years in my own kind of strange way. So we approached the city of Portland to say, we want to open a tiny house hotel. And they were like, what? And it was this head scratcher because no one had done it before. And really at the time, this was like 6.5 years ago, tiny houses weren't in the mainstream vernacular yet. It was just starting to happen. And there was no precedent for how to open a tiny house hotel where you have these tiny houses on wheels in a lot. There's no foundation, no permanent structures at all, but they're not food carts, and so there's just a crazy thing we went through. It took about over a year to get through all the city regulations to even have the go-ahead to open. The reason we started Caravan was because for Cole, my husband, his interest is in environmental planning and density issues and housing, kind of on an urban planning level. For me at the time, my interest was more in equity and access around housing issues as a teacher, former social studies teacher, and someone who worked in social justice for years, but also in the design of it and like creating this cool, funky space, and then also getting to meet people from all over the world and celebrate our city. And a lot of what we have here are local products, locally built tiny houses, local art and music, and we celebrate the heck out of this community because it's super amazing. It's a really creative place. A tiny house hotel didn't fit neatly into any category that already existed, so we kind of had to piece it together. And so what we did was we bought the lot and we made that an LLC, so like its own separate business. But then we opened Caravan, the tiny house hotel, which is everything above the lot that sits on the lot. And for that, we looked into all these options around, what is this? Is it a parking structure? Are these automobiles? No, because they're not. They're not motorized. They're not permanent structures, so they wouldn't be zoned as a hotel that was built on a foundation would be. We found this interesting loophole of it being a recreation, not an RV park, but a recreation park. And this was zoned in this whole other way, kind of like a campground. Best way in terms of city planning to look at a tiny house hotel is to really focus on the fact that these structures are not permanent, and so you can see them, and so we can't have anybody stay here more than 30 days. It's not meant to be a permanent housing situation. We're also zoned as a hotel specifically. So we pay lodging tax as a hotel does. The health department comes every year to check the tiny houses and check the lot. It's two separate things. It's the lot, the land, and then it's the hotel. We got there in the end, and it's been pretty smooth ever since, and we rode the crest of this wave that was happening around small housing and tiny houses on wheels, and the amount of media and press we've gotten from the moment we opened has been insane, honestly. And we've really seen that the demographic that this is kind of appealed to has been much more widespread than we initially thought it was. So when we entered this tiny house world, we had ideas. We thought, it's going to be a lot of people in their 30s who are kind of freaky alternative hippies, just because that's where this started. This really was a rebellious kind of screw you to the codes. When Jay Schaefer wanted to live in a small house, and the city said you can't live in anything under 200 square feet. And he was like, that's crazy. Like, why? Why not? So he put it on wheels to avoid that. And that's kind of how this whole thing originally started. We opened the doors and it started becoming more mainstream. And all these TV shows started, airing around tiny houses. And and all this media attention happened here, and Dee Williams wrote her book, The Big Tiny, and suddenly the people who were showing up here were not young alternative freaks. The pattern that we see of why so many people are attracted to this is economics, number one. And like I said, young people who don't want a life of debt, older people who want to scale down, people somewhere in the middle who just want a place they can afford. So there's a strong economic drive, for sure. Two, environmental, because the smaller the space, the less of an impact it's going to have, and that really appeals to a lot of people. And then three, social, because you're in a space that's 200 square feet. You cannot necessarily have every single piece of equipment or machinery or appliance that you would have in a big house. Thus, you're more prone to connect with your neighbors or live in community or go to the local laundromat and just be more connected to the world around you. And that is a huge pull for a lot of people. Portland has come to be known as kind of the hub of the tiny house movement. I'm saying that. I'm from Portland. I believe that. I think we have more going on around tiny houses here than probably anywhere else in the U.S., but it's changing, and we are certainly not alone anymore. I'm not saying that the tiny house movement of Portland or nationally or internationally is like moving on per se, but I do think a lot of interesting things are happening, with housing, and there's serious housing issues. Portland has 4,000 to 5,000 people a night living on the streets. It's easy to see Portland as this kind of groovy, hipster, artistic, creative mecca, and it is. It also is a city with all the same social justice issues that most cities have. I don't think tiny houses on wheels are going to vanish. I don't think it's a passing fad. But I think that it could morph into other forms of small housing, in particular because living in tiny houses, generally speaking, is still illegal in most places in the world and in this country. They're not easy to travel with. They're pretty big, and they're actually houses. They are literally the same structure as a house. Once you've lived in one for a long time, I know of a lot of couples who've broken up. There's a lot of stories. It's a really small space, and so I think that the main con is that maybe once the honeymoon is over, it's just a really small space. And for some people, that's perfect, and they are right on, and it's exactly what they need and want. And for some people, I think there's a reality that kind of happens that it's just too small of a space to share with another person, or people with kids. There are things you don't have, which for a lot of people is an appeal. It's appealing to not have everything you think you need, and to scale down and to get rid of stuff and to minimize your belongings. For some people, it starts getting more difficult to do that. So there are plenty of people that live in tiny houses for a few years and then move out, and that's great. I mean, sweet things have happened here. We've had proposals here, we've had lots of honeymoons, and lots of events, but one of the sweetest moments, a couple walked in, they came out of the caboose, and they were beaming. Anyways, they were like, we just found out we're pregnant, and they had found out inside the caboose, and I don't know, that was just super sweet to me that happened here. Fun moments have been Portlandia filmed here for a day, and that was a blast. And then our music series, we have bands play every Wednesday night in the summer. We just finished our 4th season of Caravan Campfires, and every Wednesday night, it's just sweet. I mean, we have a band, and the public comes, people make s'mores, and that's one of my favorite things. The size of houses does not meet the demand anymore at all, and it hasn't for a really long time. In this country, the average house size is, I think it's 2,300 square feet. And the demographic doesn't meet that. There are a lot of single people, there are a lot of couples, childless couples, there are people, roommates. There's so many situations that don't work for the housing stock we have. So the best thing we can do is kind of fill in the space, I think, with whether it's tiny houses on wheels or accessory dwelling units or other forms of creating density so that we can live in really creative, arrangements.
Portland seems to be a hub for tiny houses on wheels, and as it turns out, the home of Tiny Heirloom, a tiny house building company and feature of the TV show Tiny Luxury. While I tried not to fangirl out too much, I sat down with Zach Francis to find out more about their company.
My name is Zach Francis, and we're at the world headquarters for Tiny Heirloom, and our company name is Tiny Heirloom. We build luxury tiny homes, custom luxury tiny homes, so whatever the client wants, we build it for them. So I started the company with my two brothers, or my brother and my brother-in-law, and about the same time, my brother-in-law came up with the idea to start building a tiny home. Jason, my brother's mother-in-law, was trying to tell him that he should start building a tiny home. And so that's pretty much how I heard about it. They came to me and were like, hey, we're gonna do this. So we started building one tiny home, and once we decided to take the luxury spin on it, we posted the pictures and they went viral because it was kind of the first of its kind. And from that point forward, we decided to build another one, and then we just started kind of ramping up from there, and it was a snowball effect. So we're currently building about 10 tiny homes a month, something right around there. We got contacted by a production company and they asked us if we want to do a TV show. We originally said no, and then we started getting a bunch of different requests from multiple other production companies, and we kept telling them no, no, no. But the first company that approached us was pretty persistent, and they ended up convincing us that it was like a 1 in a million chance. So we decided to bet against the odds, and it ended up turning into like a full-on TV show that was about our company, and each episode was specific to a different client and the custom tiny home that we're building for them. Yeah, so when a client approaches us, we have them fill out our design questionnaire, and that kind of gives us a good idea of what they're looking for. After the design process is done, then it starts the build process, and from there we build it to the specific plans that the client approved, and so from that point we just make sure that it's exactly how the client wanted it. So one of our tiny homes is one of my all-time favorites just because it's got such a unique feature to it, and it's the rock wall tiny house that we built. That one, it's super adventurous mindset, the entire design on the inside and the outside. We have, anywhere from probably 1 to 3 people working on the specific designs. It depends on the ins and outs of it and which type of plants that we're exactly going for and all of that. And then as far as how many people are building, anywhere from probably 6 to like 15. It really depends on how fast you're needing them done. We generally say it's about a 5 to 6 week build process. Average custom probably is about $115,000. And then we do have our signature series, which is more of an average, about like 60 to 65, something like that. Probably one of the original specific really cool features that we were doing was incorporated solar and electric, battery powered tiny homes. Tiny homes are obviously what I spend, most of my week doing pretty much. And I guess the biggest way that it's impacted my life would definitely have to be the mindset behind it, and realizing that you don't need, a whole entire big home. You don't need all of this stuff to be able to actually live a quality life. It's more about the experiences that you can have, and definitely, filling your home with items and things like that doesn't always help you achieve your goal of having a quality lifestyle. There's no specific demographic that we can target. It's just like a type of person who's more, willing to be free from, just the materialism. So we build to RVIA, which is a nationally recognized code, and so they're technically travel trailers. You have to be approved by RVIA as one of their manufacturers, and then once you're approved, then they come out and they do regular facility visits, and then from there you can put on their insignia, which allows the states to register it as a RV. Technically you can put it anywhere that you could put just a standard RV, and so it does open up a lot of spots. As far as the way that tiny homes are constructed, if you don't have that, some places do allow tiny homes that don't have an insignia and whatnot, and they allow people to live in them, but it is a bit harder to find, and it's not as nationally recognized. So we do hope one day that they come out with an actual classification for tiny homes. It's not perfect by any means, but at least it's a step in the right direction, because the past, 3 years, something like that, it was pretty much all no, 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 no. We don't want it here, we don't want it here, basically. And so to see all this in this past year, pretty much end of 2017 and beginning of, or 2018 so far, it's basically done a full switch, and they're pretty tiny home friendly, which is cool. Since we do build them as RVs, they technically are legal. It just depends on what the client's end use for them is, but that's less of an issue. And so as far as what we can do and what we can build, it hasn't affected us too much. They have sent out, in the past, they had sent out a couple of pretty scary letters potentially, to where it was more or less basically saying we don't want you to manufacture in Oregon, which is obviously pretty scary when our business is based here, born and raised here. But yeah, there have been some implications, such as like financing. Some banks just wouldn't get behind them, even though they're technically completely just an RV. They wouldn't be willing to do RV loans and stuff like that. So there have been definitely some hoops that we've had to jump through. But as far as government and regulating what can be distinguished as a tiny home, there definitely needs to be a set of rules or something along those lines that when you say tiny home, you know that you're talking about specific safety features and everything that are incorporated into the tiny home. And so it can be more accepted, across the nation.
Luckily for me, Washington is just over the border of Portland, Oregon. So I drove up to meet Matt Impola, owner of the tiny house company Handcrafted Movement.
In the summer of 2015, I decided that I wanted to make a tiny house for myself. Here at my property, I have some RV space, some recreational vehicle spaces with utilities. And I thought it would be cool to make a tiny house and put it there, use it for a guest house, for a potential rental, overnight rental. And so started making that with just the intention just to make one just for fun. It turned out really good. Yeah, I really discovered kind of my a creative side that I didn't really know that I had, and I just had so much fun with the project. It took me about 10 months. Yeah, I had a blast with it, and by the time I was done with it, I decided that I wanted to do more of them, so I figured maybe I could sell this sort of thing. Maybe someone would want it, and so yeah, I decided to list it online, and I think I got like 500 emails there in a week, and I had maybe 25 people that were wanting to buy this thing, and I was just kind of blown away by what I had created. I just have a fairly small woodworking shop here, and we've kind of adapted it to work with the tiny houses, and so we start one about every month, and it's about 13 days is kind of our record, but it's about 13 to 16 working days to build one, and so we are getting faster and getting more efficient with every one. And kind of one of my calling card essentially, or what sets me apart, is that every single one that we do is a one-off creation, and that we don't do any repeats, and we don't take any orders. So all of them are built speculatively. And so there's a lot of people that would like to order one, but for this time in this season right now, we're just having fun creating kind of what we want to create. And then when they're all done, just stage them with furniture and plants and everything, and take pictures and put them online, and people buy them up. That's one reason why I don't like taking orders, and I enjoy just the process. It really unfolds on itself, and it's pretty free form, and it kind of evolves as we're building. We usually, as we're framing, we're deciding kind of where to put a window, where it feels right in the wall, and where to put the door. And so there's some things that are set in stone, and some of the engineering aspects obviously that need to be sorted out, and that you can't change. They're permanent, but I enjoy the flexibility that we have to and the freedom that we have to move things around, even at the last minute if we want to. It's a little bit of an adaptation, I guess. I'm very familiar with the standards of residential building, traditional residential building, and traditional residential framing. And then there's something called advanced framing, where the goal is essentially to use less wood, but be smarter with the wood that you use, because the insulation value of wood is pretty low compared to insulation. And so I use a little bit of a hybrid of that system. I understand there's certain things that are going to resonate with the market, and certain things that are trendy. For instance, like a white exterior with black windows is really kind of a thing right now. And there's many other little design elements that I know are really on trend or whatever. And I'll do certain elements, but I also like to kind of do my own style. You can pull these around; they are mobile, which is amazing. But also, like, there's some real work that needs to be done if you're going to pull a house around it. It's not it's not as easy as pulling maybe a traditional travel trailer, that's for sure. I mean, these are very tall and very not aerodynamic and heavy. And I'm putting chandeliers in, and so you need to really like do some work before you can just hook up and go. I've attended many tiny house shows all over the country, and I enjoy going to them, but since I don't take any orders, I haven't really seen the benefit of going to any of the shows and having 20,000 people walk through my house and want to order one when I don't take orders. Even 10, 20 years ago, you would have to do a lot of marketing and knock on a lot of doors to find your customers, but now it's pretty cool that they kind of find me. My typical buyer is probably 45 to 65-year-old women are usually kind of the ones that are buying these actually, and the vast majority are actually from California. They usually are kind of middle to upper income, and they usually are educated and have a certain design background or aesthetic, and my style is probably a little bit more California than kind of Northwest. It's a little more clean and minimal and light and bright and a little brighter colors, a little more beachy than the Northwest profile. And so I think for all those reasons, it seems to be that's the common theme. A tiny house can be a perfect solution, especially one like this with the downstairs bedroom where, you know, their mother can be on their property but age in place with dignity and have her space to have her freedom, but also be very close there to her kids. And then when she passes, they could use the tiny house for something else, maybe for their own teenagers who are now grown, or maybe for a guest house, or they could sell it because it's on wheels and it's mobile and someone else could use it for whatever their purpose is. So yeah, that's something I enjoy about the whole movement, is just the flexibility that these are offering people. This is a kind of a hot spot, the Portland area here, for a number of reasons. I think just that housing on the West Coast has gotten really expensive, and so people are begging for alternatives. They're looking for alternative solutions, and just that people on the West Coast are generally a little more open-minded about new ideas. Houses on foundations are expensive and land is expensive, and these will always be popular because they are a real viable solution for, maybe not necessarily for big families for sure, but for one person or a young married couple or something like that, they're totally doable. The movement itself, I think, is in its infancy, and so it's kind of cool to be part of a movement where it's just starting really, and to see how quickly things are changing and growing, and how there's even design standards and legal standards still haven't even been established. There's no permit process for these, and there's so yeah, it's very, very early. I'm actually excited if we can have some established industry standards that we're able to hold ourselves to, because I think there's many people that are starting to build them that maybe don't have a clue what they're doing and are building them in an unsafe way. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Being in the residential building industry and trying to get housing permits going through that process for about 10 years, you get to really understand that it's really burdensome and really, in many ways, I think, there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's just a lot of regulations that I think aren't serving anyone well, and that are actually really restrictive on people. They have a lot of minimum design standards, minimum square footage that you can build, and for the governments, they are doing that because they want a higher tax. They want to be able to charge higher tax value on your property, and for the builders, it's much more worth their time to build something bigger than smaller. And for the real estate industry, they get a percentage of the finished sale, so they want a higher sales price. For the mortgage lender, they want to give you a bigger mortgage, and so all of them are excited to do bigger, but I think there's many people that are excited about trying to do something smaller and something more that their mortgage payment isn't, taking up 30, 40, 50% of what they're taking home. Historically, anything that's on wheels, whether it's a car, whether it's a motor home or a tiny house, is going to depreciate in value and go down in value. The question's still out and how much this will depreciate, say over 5 or 10 years, but traditionally that's how it's happened, and anything that's on a foundation goes up in value, and so that would mean this isn't necessarily the best asset or investment. I think small houses in a compact environment, on foundations where people could actually own the land and own the house. I think that would be the ultimate in many people's eyes. Probably a big thing with some people is the compost toilets. If you don't have access to a septic connection or sewer, then you're gonna have to use a compost toilet. And I know for some people that's a little bit of a shock or something that they're unable to handle. So not every government or state or city is going to be excited about welcoming tiny houses, but I think if you could do it in a way that they could be a benefit to your community. Actually, I never imagined even 3 or 4 years ago that I'd be building houses on trailers, and enjoying it and making a living at it and having fun with it. And but it's really cool that it's kind of been here all along, but it's only in the last few years that for some reason it's become a thing. There's a certain amount of the trend that will probably taper out a little bit, but I think the fundamental core idea, at least for myself, that I'm most excited about is providing legitimate housing solutions for people. I think that's always going to be a viable thing. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't last as long as a traditional house. I mean, 30 to 50 to 70 years. I mean, the verdict's a little bit out. I think all of the materials that I'm using are traditional house materials, but I would like to think as long as a traditional house, as long as you take care of it. So, and definitely longer than a recreational vehicle or motor home. I've seen firsthand, I've experienced firsthand and seen firsthand many of those within 3 to 5 years are starting to leak and deteriorate pretty quickly. So I see no reason why these couldn't last many years beyond that. As far as problems or maintenance or whatever, it's been almost nothing. It's been remarkable that they've been working out really well for them. And I've had a number of them say, like, this is the best. One of them said, this famous writer actually bought one of them and she's using it for kind of a writer's retreat. And she said last year their family agreed that was their best memory of 2017 was buying that tiny house and having that, or that was the best decision. And so I've heard that a number of them say that they're like so overjoyed and excited that they bought this tiny house, and 2 years later and we're loving our tiny house. The typical house here in the States is maybe 2,500 square feet, and so this is 250 square feet. And so if you have 100% and you take away 90% and you have that little 10% left, then there's going to be compromises. So some of these TV shows, I think, try to paint it as this lifestyle where you can have it all. I'm still excited and proud about what we're building, and just that every single one is unique and different and one-off, and I enjoy challenging myself with every single one. It'd definitely be easy to design one model and then just start pumping those out and just producing, tons of them, but it's much more challenging but fun with each one to just take certain elements from previous projects, but then also always be looking to innovate and pursue excellence.
Whilst in Portland, I also paid a visit to Dignity Village, a tiny house village established since 2001 for people experiencing homelessness. The village originated when a group of homeless people banded together for safety and were sheltering under a local bridge. Eventually, the group reached over 80 people and began advocating for a place to shelter. The land is owned by the City of Portland and now shelters 60 people a night. Most of the structures were built with donations, and now the houses are built by local students, which are then donated to residents. So it provides not only an educational outlet, but also community benefit. Residents are self-sufficient by having enterprises such as providing wood, taking advantage of the city's recycling rebate, and by participating in local markets or job seeking elsewhere. Residents are required to pay a small amount of rent and given a probationary period when they first move in. The site contains a communal kitchen and lounge room, as well as a shared bathroom and shower facilities, which, as one resident noted, can get difficult when the tanks freeze over in winter. The site also contains a shared computer room for residents and a communal vegetable garden. This self-governed tiny house village is an excellent example of how tiny houses can be used for great community benefit. My final stop was in Mount Hood Tiny House Village, which was a tiny house tourism village set amongst the forests of Mount Hood within a camping ground. Iconic for their brightly painted tumbleweed tiny homes and well-known tiny house visitors, this village is a relaxing retreat. This RV park also hosts campers, caravans and permanent cabins. As the tiny houses are licensed as RVs and the land is zoned as a standard RV park, this tiny house village doesn't have some of the regulatory constraints that other villages do. Each of the tiny houses are given names and personalities and tucked away between the trees with a shared campfire and seating area. Tiny house owners also have the option of parking their house on site and renting it out to visitors. Located close to nature with mountains, hiking and bike trails, there is plenty to do if you need a bit more space. After travelling so far and meeting so many amazing people, I'm still left with one question unanswered. How much space should one person really inhabit? One thing is for certain, these tiny houses have been around for decades and aren't going anywhere. Well, they have wheels, so I mean, technically they could go anywhere, but you know what I mean. The question is, would you live in a tiny house?